Hello everyone, and welcome to Webinar Wednesdays at the Early Intervention Training Program at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, or Urbana-Champaign. My name is Maria Maddox, and I will be one of your moderators for today, and I'll be introducing the rest of folks here in just a few minutes. Welcome aboard. So to introduce today's presenter, our presenter is Angel Fettig, and she is an assistant professor at the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. She will tell you a little bit more about herself, but I do understand that she is an alum of U of I, and they are very happy to have her back. For the rest of us as moderators, you all know me, Maria Maddox. We will also have Nikki Ostrowski, who is also one of our moderators. She will be coming on every so often to help me facilitate the questions. We also have Alyssa Jones, who is a research specialist with the EI training program, who is also helping us kind of behind the scenes. So these are the folks that you will potentially be hearing from today. If you've not participated in this, I've got a few things I need to share with you. So in order to get your certificate of attendance, you will have needed to have signed up on your own, and you will get a unique email from the Early Intervention Training Program after the webinar is completed that will have a survey link in it. And once you complete the survey, your certificate of attendance will be emailed to you within 24 hours. Webinars are great because we get to kind of hang out and sit where we are and not travel, but we don't get to see each other's faces. So we do like to try to get folks to participate as much as possible. So you have a couple of ways that we're going to ask you to do that. The first will be using the chat box. Some of you have been kind of chatting back and forth, letting us know where you're logging in from, those kind of things. So we'll use the chat for you to respond to questions that the presenter may ask, to add comments that you might have about something the presenter has shared. Share strategies with each other is always a good thing, or even just say hi to somebody you haven't seen in a while. You can make the chat box larger or smaller by detaching the chat box, and you can move it around on your screen so you can see more of the text or less of the text. Another way that we will ask you to help participate is with a couple of these things. You can add an emoticon to your name, and letting folks know that you are feeling good today, that you approve of whatever is being said. Great way to kind of show that you're here. Also, the presenter, Angel, may ask you to do a show of hands if you agree with something or disagree with something, however, and you would click that third box that's right under your name. I'm going to ask you now, just do me a show of hands to let me know that you can, oh good, that you can hear me okay. Awesome, awesome. Thank you. Okay. The last way of participating is with the polling function, and it is the fourth box under your name. We will ask you to click that fourth box to respond to any polls that might be here. So I have a sample poll up already. Let us know who you are participating, if you're a parent or caregiver, an EI provider, CFC staff, administrator, or other. And if you are an other, we do ask that you use the chat box and let us know who you are. Let us know who all is here. If you are, give folks a few minutes to respond to that. And looks like, all right, let's see who we've got here. All right, so we have a good mix of EI providers and CFC staff. We do have a parent or caregiver on board, as well as some administrators. So when you are responding to the polls, make sure that you use the polling function, which is right under your name, and it is the fourth box under your name, and it'll either have a letter or a checkbox. All right. So with that being said, I am going to turn this over to Angel, and she will tell you a little bit more about herself, and we'll get into our presentation.
Hello, everyone. This is Angel. I am very excited to be here to share with you guys about some strategies I've used around family center practice. And like what Maria had mentioned, I am an alumni of University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, so I'm very excited to be able to share this with you guys in Illinois. So today on our agenda, we are going to talk about the importance of family center intervention, and we are then going to discuss some benefits as well as challenges around family center practices. And then I will also be sharing some evidence-based strategies on how to best support family center practices. And then at the end of this webinar, we will be looking at 2 case scenarios and discuss what strategies we will use to support family center practices in each of these scenarios. And these scenarios are things that I encounter myself, things my colleagues and people I work with in early intervention have encountered. So they are probably scenarios that you have encountered too, and we will work through to think about what are some strategies we can use to tackle these issues we see. So let's get started. In order to have effective early intervention services, these 3 components are crucial. We need to know the families we serve. We need to have family involvement within the intervention, and we must assess to know whether or not our intervention practices are effective. These components highlight the importance of family center practices. Family center practice is really the cornerstone of early intervention practices. When thinking about core to family center intervention, we need to be sensitive and respectful of cultures and values of individual families. The purpose of early intervention service is to achieve family and child outcomes and not just child outcomes. So on this figure, you see a model of parent-child interaction that's developed by Samra back in 2000. And Samra proposed this model that highlights the influence of parent-child interaction. When we think about children who are born with a disability or has been identified with a disability at a young age, it often leads to parents feeling anxious regarding how to handle or take care of them. When parents are anxious, it then leads to children's poor self-regulation. Parents are then often disengaged when children have poor self-regulation. And we know that when parents are disengaged, children tend to have poor language and social skill outcomes. And then, of course, then it continues as a cycle between the poor interactions between children and families. Then when we look at this figure, if you look at how parents respond, it has a high impact on children's outcomes. So when children have, are diagnosed with disability or were born with complications, if parents are confident at handling and caring for them, it leads to better child self-regulation. And then when children have better self-regulation, you're going to see a higher parent engagement because they will see the reciprocity between the parent and child when they interact. And when parents are highly engaged with their children, then children are going to have better language and social skills outcomes, and the better outcomes continue on in children's lives. Okay, so this really highlights that family participation in early intervention services improve child and family outcomes. And this is really highlighted by Guralnick in 1997 and 2005. So really, the model really highlights the key of family center practices. Okay. So let's think a little bit about benefits of family involvement for early intervention. And I pulled some quotes that are, dated back to 1970s to recently, really to think about what exactly are the benefits of family involvement in early intervention practices. So Bronfenbrenner, who we are very familiar, who has the ecological family systems approach, really highlighted that without family involvement, intervention is likely to be unsuccessful, and what few effects are achieved are likely to disappear once the intervention is continued. Again, back in 1970s, the Comptroller General stated that the most effective programs are those where parents are closely involved. Landy in 2006 highlighted that interventions adapted to a particular child and family, which include the family, are most likely to benefit the child. And I think this one is very key in really guiding us to think about the key benefits and what exactly is family-centered practice. Parents act in synergy with many influences, most notably the child's biologically based characteristics, but also the family, preschool, child care center, school, neighborhood, community, and larger culture. You know, and really thinking about children develop around the context of their environment, especially family and their caregivers. So without involving them in families, in children's intervention, we're not going to see the success or the outcomes that we want to see. So here's a model proposed by Guralnick regarding developmental systems model looking at what affects the child outcome or child development. So on the screen, you're going to see that a lot of child characteristics are key factors in child development. So, you know, thinking about the individual differences of children, the disability, the strengths, the race, the culture, the values that the children are learning within. Those are all key child characteristics. There are also some stressors within the child's life, whether it's neighborhood factors, whether it's poverty factors, whether it's specific race and ethnicity factors. Those are child characteristics that then leads to thinking about family patterns of interaction. So all these child characteristics and stressors affect the quality of transactions between the family and the child, and child's experiences growing up, child's experiences throughout their development, and then also the health and safety of the child. And then all of these then lead to outcomes of child development. And so we know that these characteristics are key, and to the extent that we can understand these characteristics, get to know the families, and then interact with the families in a way that value and support their needs, we're going to see better child outcomes. So again, this highlights the families as partners within early intervention. So making families as partners ensures that families receive the education and training they need in order to support their child's development. And so within early intervention, our goal is to support the families who will then support the child throughout the day. If we only support the children within our early intervention services, then the amount of exposure to opportunities and the amount of support they get is very limited. This next slide really highlights the key of why we need to involve families in our early intervention services. This is a slide that I created to calculate the amount, roughly the amount of time children receive intervention. So if we are early intervention providers going into families' homes and we only work with children who we serve, say we work with the child 1 hour a week. That means the child gets about 4 hours a month because there are roughly 4 weeks in the month, and they get about 48 hours a year. So 48 hours a year for a child with special needs who need intensive services is really not a lot at all. Versus if we think about family-centered practice, where we go in the families and we work with the parents in supporting the child's development. I calculated this based on about 8 hours of family-child interaction, caregiver-child interaction. The child is going to get about 56 hours per week of intervention because we have taught families how to interact with children that support their development. That then translates to about 224 hours a month, which then translates to about over 2,600 hours a year. So you can see the drastic difference of hours of service a child can receive if we focus on family-centered practice rather than going in the homes and only work with children. Okay, so 0 to 3, which is an organization that looks at children who supports the work around children birth through 3, really looked at the major elements of social emotional wellness within infancy. And they highlighted that we need to develop the capacity for children to form close and secure relationships. We need to allow them to experience, regulate, and express emotions. We need to explore the environment and learn in the context of family, culture, and most importantly, really thinking about cultural expectations for young children. Because young children develop around the context of their family, without family-centered practice, these will not be achieved. So if we only go in with and work with the children individually, these key skills children need at their young age is not going to be achieved. So it's very important that we continue to think about how do we then provide families with family-centered practice. So we've highlighted benefits of why we need to focus on family-centered practice. But we know that it's not as easy as it might sound or it might seem, and we've all encountered some challenges. So at this point, I would like you to take about 30 seconds and really type in your chat box, what are some of the challenges you face in implementing family-centered practices?
Okay, use your chat box here to put your responses to some of the challenges. Let's see, Michelle is talking about the challenge when the new team and other team members are not using family-centered. When you're new to the team and other team members aren't using family-centered practices. When families say they don't have time. Mary Cruz talks about scheduling. Teresa talks about families being too busy. Abby talks about getting families to understand the importance of empathy. Kristen says similar. Lynn talks about lack of understanding by all disciplines, the understanding levels of the family. Looks like you got quite a few responses here, Angel. Seeing child and business centers and survivors that are busy with other kids. Mary talks about families who don't want to participate. Eileen talks about poverty and families moving too often. You've got quite a few there. I should go on and on at this point.
Yeah, so lots of, kind of key challenges that we might all face when we work with families. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and talk about challenges in specific categories and, kind of also highlighting some of the ones that you have shared as well in your chat room. So the first challenge I've highlighted here is to think about culture and beliefs that children and families bring. Key examples of some of these challenges are some cultural groups really have a very different opinion regarding what exactly is disability. There are groups who really believe that the disability is, God's will, and there is nothing we can do about it. And so in this case, you might then think about then you might get the reaction from families saying, I am not willing to participate, or, I don't think early intervention is necessary, or I don't think early intervention is going to support my child. So that's oftentimes one of the key cultural pieces that we might see of the idea that there is nothing we can do about it. And there are also beliefs and cultures who really felt that having a disability is very embarrassing for the family. And so, trying to minimize the amount of people coming to the house or talking about the culture, about the disability could be present in the home settings. There are also cultures that really don't like sharing a lot of the personal values and personal family values with others. And so as much as we as providers go in and try to, try to get to know the family, you oftentimes feel like we are not able to gather the information necessary in order to effectively provide family-centered practice. And the next challenge that I have highlighted here is perhaps the differences within shared goals or outcomes. And this difference could be within family members. It could also be, the difference between what the family see as important versus something that you as a provider bring to the table as what are the key skills children need. For example, I've worked with families where the dad really felt that early intervention is very necessary for the child in order for the child to be successful, but the mother doesn't think that way, or vice versa. And so, this particular family I've worked with a child with autism, the mother had to schedule early intervention at times that the father is not around, or have to make sure that she makes phone calls to early intervention service agency when the dad is at work. And so it almost becomes this really hard, difficult situation for the family, which then leads to, a lot of no-shows and a lot of not following through. So sometimes we might also see that parents have very different expectations or perhaps unrealistic expectations of early intervention or for their child. And as an early intervention provider coming into the homes, we are trying to be understanding and value their opinions and value their beliefs. However, we also want to make sure that the outcomes that are identified are realistic, and trying to find that balance could also be very difficult. And the next slide, it's oftentimes the barriers that we see within our field, and some of you have highlighted in the chat box, is the communication. And of course, communication between families are key, but this communication also goes beyond just communicating with families. Communicating with our team, who we work together to support the families, are oftentimes a challenge as well. Thinking about what are the key outcomes, key shared goals, what exactly are family-centered practice. I, as an early intervention provider, might completely believe in family-centered practice, but some other specialists, some other providers going into the homes are not practicing these same important practices, and then me as early intervention provider finding that my support in early intervention or in family-centered practice becomes very limited. And then coming back to communication with families, whether it's language barrier, whether it's understanding of goals of early intervention practices. These are all communications that are very important in order for early intervention to be successful. And when we run into barriers, even just things like scheduling and understanding the expectations of early intervention, these communication can oftentimes become barriers and break down some of the family-professional relationships we have, which then impact family-centered practice. And then the next one is thinking about bridging research to practice. So really thinking about what is some evidence-based practice, and how do I provide that to families who really need, who evidence-based practice are key in supporting the child development and parent-child interaction. So how do we ensure that practices we are using to support family-centered intervention is evidence-based? Our field continues to evolve, continues to change, and, keeping up with what is the knowledge out there is very important, and it's our job as early intervention provider. We need to understand these, but then also how do we then translate these to families? How do we know that the practices that come in hand are evidence-based? And then how do we know that specific practices are the best for this specific family who we work with? And then there are others that you guys have highlighted. You know, some of the things that you highlighted were, you know, I am new to a team. What do I do? You know, how do I might bring the idea of that family-centered practice is very important. But the agency I work with or the providers I work with do not think the same as I do. So how do I make sure that these knowledge or my point of view is conveyed in a way that people understand the importance of family-centered practices? I'm looking back at the chat box and really highlighting some that I haven't highlighted. Someone has said, you know, families who live in lack of, you know, adversity, so things like poverty, families moving around frequently, or sometimes don't even have phone service because they live in really rural areas, or because their phone numbers keep changing due to their family circumstances. Those are really key challenges that we face daily, and sometimes dependent on the population we serve. Families who are too busy to participate because, you know, they have other demands. Sometimes for some families, putting food on the table is their primary goal. Participating in early intervention is not, you know, something that's on their mind. Or when you come into the family's house, they see you as someone who provides some relief to their daily routine, and they can, you know, run off and take a shower really quick because they don't get to do that, you know, without this interruption very frequently. So they see it as, this is a time for me to take a breather while you work with my child, while someone is working with my child, and my child is very overwhelming, very demanding, and I get a break. So some of these things are really key issues, as, you know, we know that the basic needs of the families really need to be acknowledged, addressed, if we want family-centered practice to be successful. Let's see. So,
it's me,
Maria, I'm going to turn it back to you.
One question, you answered a lot of things that were brought up as challenges by the group. One that I think that people need to really think about is this idea that you might be working with other providers who are not implementing a family-centered practice model, who are more of a medical model. And how do you explain it and get buy-in without discounting their approach with the family and or with that provider who's been trained in a different way than you have? So I don't know if you want to address that at all.
Yeah, I think that's always very tricky, and sometimes we know that people's beliefs and people's trainings that are different from ours, it's very hard for people to kind of, you know, think outside the box. And I oftentimes feel that to the extent you can, providing resources and evidence base that highlights why families are, you know, why family-centered practice is key. And so when I myself get a lot of those questions as well. And one of the key things that I've found that people are very receptive to was that slide that I developed about number of hours children gain in terms of getting interaction that support their development when you work with families versus working only with children. And I think, you know, being able to find resources and highlight why family-centered practice is important, to show some of the other specialists, some other providers, I think those are some of the key strategies to get them in thinking about why this is important.
Okay, sounds great. I think that's really the main one. You addressed most of the others, you know, families being too busy, not understanding the importance. Someone did ask about when children reside in more than one home, so they go back and forth. And again, I think it's communication, and I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, but if a child is spending part of the time at moms and dads, or grandmas and moms, you know, communicating that back and forth about what you're working on, what the strategies are. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that one, Angel.
Yeah, my current project, I do work with a population who are high risk, and they do reside in, you know, sometimes 2-3 homes between the dad, the mom, and the grandparent. And I think it's important to be able to provide resources in a way that allows them to share with one another. So, for example, you know, very concrete strategies we worked on in the early interventions in the home visit session, providing written material that's of their language, that are very accessible to them, provide multiple copies, that allows them to, hand it to another person who takes care of their child, and also offering the opportunity to speak with these individuals as well. We all know that because each of these caretakers, they spend a significant amount of time with the child. So as an early intervention professional, we can speak to them and talk about some of the strategies we're working on and getting their perspective of what they see when they are working with the children. Those are all beneficial strategies.
Okay, I think we're ready to learn how to do it now.
Okay. Let's see. So, we've talked about benefits and challenges. Now let's think about how do we effectively address all these challenges and effectively implement family-centered practices. So, effective early intervention services really thinks about helping families focus on their child's development. And these are the 3 key components we need to think about when we're thinking about how do we do that. The first one is to interact positively to support child development. So interacting positively with the families, interacting positively with the caretakers that take care of families. We also need to think about using family activities for learning, thinking about the routines the children engage in throughout the day. We also need to think about collaborative planning, and thinking about what are some things that we can support the families in planning so that when we are not there, they can continue to implement some of these strategies. And I'm going to talk about more of the I'm going to talk more about each of these as we continue on. So collaborating with families is really thinking about understanding the affectionate, warm, respectful, and positive relationships we build with the families. So these are, making sure that we are presenting ourselves in a way that they can connect with. We are showing our genuine interest in understanding them and supporting them, valuing their culture and valuing their beliefs. Sometimes they share things that are really different than our beliefs, but we need to understand that respect is the first key feature of building relationship and collaborating with families. And so, checking our own beliefs at the door to make sure that we're not bringing our own biases into the family is very, very important. And all these interactions will lead to positive relationships with the family, which we know is one of the key steps in ensuring family-centered practice. When we have positive relationships with families, everything else comes a little bit easier. When they build that trust with you, when they understand your goal coming in is to support them, they're more likely to be open up and share some of the values and beliefs they have with you. And then so thinking a little bit more about relationship-focused practice. Relationships are different from just interactions we have with families. When we think about interaction, it could very much just be a phone call with them, a scheduling with them. Those are all interactions. But relationships are different in the sense that there are emotional connections. I am showing that I'm genuinely, interested in understanding your family. I'm generally here to want to support you and your child's interaction. Relationships endure over time. Oftentimes I hear early intervention providers say that they still keep in contact with some of the families they've worked with 10 years ago. Those are the key features that highlight the relationship piece of the parent-child or parent-professional interaction. Relationships also have special meanings between the two people. You find things that you connect with. You create memories and expectations in all the parties that are involved. So, there are things that you continue to talk about 10 years later after you have worked with this family. So those are the things that we look for when we're thinking about relationships rather than just interactions that we have. Working with families is encouraging interactions with the parents. Encouraging the parent to interact with you as an early intervention provider. Also encouraging the family to interact with the child who you are providing service to. So encouraging them to understand that this interaction supports the child development. And that requires the families interacting with you as the early intervention provider, as well as families interacting with the children at home. Working with families is offering new information, resources, and strategies. So through us coming into the homes, providing early intervention services, we are teaching and offering new knowledge that parents might not have about child development, or knowledge that they might already have but requires a little more practice. So we're offering these new information, resources, and strategies for them to try, during the session and after we have left the home visit session. Working with families is active partnership in their relationship with their child. That means that, during intervention setting, the parent and the child are working together. They're enjoying one another. They are working on something that they enjoy, but at the same time supporting the child's development. Working with families is using resources families have to support parent-child interaction. This could mean using the toys the families already have in the house, or resources such as Tupperware, rice, beans, pasta, paper. This ensures that when we leave the family's home after the intervention session, families can continue to use the resources around the house to interact with their child. They know how to use these items to interact with their children because we have shown them how to when we're in their home. We use these same materials to show them how they can interact with children to support development. Working with families is not bringing in a bag of fancy toys and taking them away at the end of the visit. And I know that this is a pretty common practice, but I think it's important for us to reflect on what are the messages we're sending when we bring in a big toy bag, and at the end of the visit, when we are saying goodbye, we're taking the toy bag away. When we bring in toys that families don't have and do not have the resources to purchase them or access to them, this limits the opportunity they have at home once we walk away. Oftentimes parents have a hard time thinking about, well, I just saw how you interacted with my child using this fancy toy. How do I reproduce that same interaction? Sometimes finding resources around the home to work on the same developmental outcome is very difficult for families. And that's why it's very important for us to identify resources families already have in the home and use those materials to support that parent-child interaction so that when we walk away, families can continue to do so. Working with families is not a set schedule of prescribed activities. We're not coming into the family's home and say, before I come back next time, you should have tried 5 times of, having your child put blocks in a container. That's not how family-centered practice works. It's not a set of directive approach that involves directions or continuing to say you should do this or you should do this or don't do this or don't do that. So it's really not a prescribed set of shoulds or do's. It's really thinking about how do you find something that's enjoyable for the family, and then through that experience, then families can support children's development. One of the key things that Rush and Sheldon in their book in 2011 highlighted key strategies of how do we work with diverse families. And diverse doesn't mean just race and ethnicity, but it reflects values, beliefs, and culture. It also reflects families' socioeconomic status, where they live, poverty, things like that. So one of the key things that Rush and Sheldon highlighted was to practice self-reflection about values, beliefs, and assumptions we have. What are some beliefs we bring in, and how might that impact our interaction with the families we work with? That is, when we are aware of our own assumptions, it's easier for us to be able to check those at the door and not bringing into the families' homes and judging the families. We also need to consider the context for families' lifestyles, opinions, and choices. Families, we know that when we go into individual families' homes, everyone's lifestyle is very different, and the choices they made look really different from one another and very different than ours. So being able to consider that context, even though it's something outside of our own belief, but considering that context is important so that we can support the family-child interaction. And we need to become comfortable with discomfort. We know we're going to go into families and see things that are not something we believe in, and we are very uncomfortable when we see it. But we really need to acknowledge that those are the family's choices and family's values, and we are not judging the families based on what we see. And then consider the communication style and expectations. And this kind of highlight the whole, family's values, beliefs, and their style of communication. We really need to understand the communication they bring to the table and think about what is the best way for us to communicate with them in order for family-centered practice to be successful. Sometimes we work with interpreters. We might work with families who speak a language that's not the same as ours. For example, working with Spanish-speaking family, or in my location, we work a lot with Vietnamese families. I do not know a single word in Vietnamese, but it's, some family might be referred to me for a specific reason. So really finding ways to work with this family is important. So building relationships with both family and interpreters are key. We have to make sure we have a good relationship with the interpreter so that what we're saying is interpreted accurately with the family, and so that the interpreter is comfortable talking to us openly regarding concerns shared with families. We have to explain the collaboration process to interpreters. Oftentimes, the interpreters might be a family friend or someone who does not work in our field. And so explaining how do we collaborate in this early intervention process, what are some of the key strategies we're going to be using, is very important for the interpreter to understand before this collaboration relationship. We oftentimes can ask some yes or no or more direct questions to check for understanding through this interpretation process. And the yes or no question can be directed to the interpreter and to the family. So thinking about when you're unsure whether or not the interpretation is conveyed, your knowledge is conveyed correctly through the interpretation, we can ask direct questions to check that. And then we can ask more open-ended questions to promote reflection and thinking about what was interpreted through the process and what families has learned through this process. And also allow for lots of practice, right? When we're working with families, the actions that families take will allow us to understand whether or not the idea was conveyed across. So allowing lots of opportunities to practice is important. We can also use the strategy of asking families to suggest. So ask the family what they have tried or how their intervention is going is very key in our family-centered practice. This allows that we acknowledge the family's experience before giving solutions. So when families provide information, we can ask them, can I see what you're talking about? So that we have a clear understanding of what the family is trying to convey, and then thinking about then what's the best way to support the parent-child interaction. We can offer the suggestion. saying things like, may I offer you a suggestion to try differently? You know, really understanding that we're not just coming in and saying, you need to try this, but using a softer language to provide suggestions, oftentimes support that relationship building piece as well. And of course, we can use modeling and practice to continue to guide parent-child interaction. And, you know, as we see that parents are gaining more confidence and competence, then we can fade away some of our very specific prompts, such as, you know, let's try this, let me model this, to guide the parent in taking more of the lead in that interaction. We can also ask to suggest, to gather information about why the family isn't implementing a specific technique. You know, when we ask families to reflect on what are some of the things that were done in between sessions, we can probe a little bit more on, you know, tell me what are some barriers that prevented using these strategies throughout the day. Are there any resources I can provide you in implementing the strategy? Sometimes families use different techniques to implement maybe the same strategy that you had talked about. So getting an understanding of how the family is implementing that specific strategy or specific technique is very important. We can also gather information to see whether or not it's maybe because families give up too early because they don't see the response that they were hoping for from the child. And I think oftentimes we see that in our home visit sessions where families said that they tried the strategy that we talked about, but it didn't work because the child did not respond. And so affirming the family's competence and continue to support them in trying and figuring out different ways to try is helpful.
Okay, and so one question or comment that keeps showing up, or has shown up for a little bit here in the chat room, has to do with going bagless. So Teresa was kind of posing or having a discussion with a couple other participants about how do you initially go bagless. One suggestion she posed was start with new families, because if kids expect, you know, toddlers expect you to show up with a bag, that might be harder to wean. But if you kind of put it amongst yourself or on yourself, I'm going to start with a new family and try it. Are there other ideas or resources you have, or even other participants have, that they could put in the chat room for providers who want to start to go bagless? What can they do? How can they go that route?
Yeah, I'm very curious to hear what some other people have to say about that. But I think what I've tried in, you know, working with families who, when I work with early intervention providers, making suggestions of perhaps next time you go in, only bring the 2 toys that the child really likes. And then during that session, then provide suggestions of let's find other things that are similar to these toys that I brought, you know, to bring into the intervention. And then, you know, you can fade some of the toys that you bring in away, then become, you know, bagless coming into the family. So I completely understand and want to acknowledge that just going from today, I have a whole big bag of toys and the kids really like it, to next time coming in completely empty, it could be really hard transition for the child, especially if the child's seeing you, you know, a couple times a week. But really thinking about fading that away, and then when you fade away, when you bring less toys in, then you're involving families and highlight or identifying things they can use in the home to bring into the intervention.
Yeah, and I think Kristen just put up a good point, that explaining the rationale or the research behind why you as a provider are going bagless, helping the family understand that their environment really is rich with so many learning opportunities, like the idea of, you know, with Tupperwares or empty toilet rolls or paper towel rolls or other things, you know, outside that you can play with depending on the weather. So I think helping families see, too, why you're not bringing, even though another therapist before you, another DT, might have brought toys.
Mm-hmm.
Another thought that came up, or a question, was Lynn suggested going on outings with families to develop relationships. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, Angel.
Yeah. So one of the family I worked with really closely, one day, it was, you know, in Boston, last year we snowed a lot, and one of the provider realized really quickly that this child hasn't been outside in several days. And so she had suggested to the family that let's take the child to the playground and we can do our intervention there. And so, you know, the parents were very open to it. And so they walked across the street to the playground, and the interaction was very different than what they saw in the home, but, you know, different in a way that still supports the child's development really well. And so I think being able to, you know, tag along with families for a change of setting could also guide the families in understanding that you can implement a lot of these strategies outside when you're out with your child, doing your daily routines, running errands and things like that.
Okay, that sounds great, Angel. You probably have about 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Yep.
I'm going to let you keep going.
Great, sounds good. All right, so here is really to highlight some of the characteristics of how the effective family parent-focused interventions. So the very first step is to really go in and set expectations from the start. You know, being there and providing the expectation that the parent participation, parent involvement in this home visit intervention is key, and, you know, convey the message that when I come in here, the expectation is for the parent to interact with the child while I'm here supporting that interaction. And then, you know, really thinking about interventions are really brief and focused. You're highlighting key strategies families can use, and then they can try it right there. And then you are collaboratively talking about what has been tried and what do you see as responses from the child, and what does that mean in terms of effectiveness of that specific strategy. And then really focusing on embedding the activities into daily routines and things they do throughout the day. So for example, if you're working on fine motor skills, think about how can that be worked on throughout the different routines, whether it's bath time, whether it's dinner time, whether it's going to the grocery store. And then using these specific scenarios to highlight these embedding routines. So within your home visit intervention session, you can talk about when you go to the grocery store, you know, the child can help you grab items off the shelf and put it in the shopping cart. So using these scenarios to highlight how it can be done throughout the day. Within our intervention session, we can model for the parents, we can do role play, we want the families to try these strategies, and we act as this coach and facilitator and guide them in thinking about how is this done and providing them feedback as necessary. We can demonstrate using videos. I've used videos that I have gathered to support families in thinking about how specific strategies can be used outside of this intervention setting. And then, you know, discuss what are some challenges that might occur and how do you tackle those challenges. You know, and then really thinking about, you know, how can you then ensure interactions throughout this this process, you know, watching the video, checking in and having feedback, and then assigning homework practices, you know, think about what are some things you can try during your routines while in between the sessions. That's very important too. So because of time, I'm going to quickly go over the triadic strategies that I think are key strategies that we can support family intervention practice. And the triadic interactions really means that the facilitator, which is you, the early intervention provider, you are supporting the parent-child interaction. So using triadic strategies, triadic interaction strategies are those that are used by the facilitator, which is you, the early intervention provider, during parent-child interactions to expand and build interactions that are pleasurable for both partners and supportive of children's development, while also recognizing and strengthening the natural competency of parents as they interact with their child. Okay, so what does this look like? There are 6 specific triadic strategies that I'm going to quickly go over and highlight what each of them look like. And when these are implemented, you are seeing a very good family-centered practice approach. So the first one is establishing a dyadic context. And this is highlighting things in the environment and arranging the environment in a way that increase the probability of developmentally matched, mutually enjoyable parent-child interaction. So thinking about what can you do in the environment and what can you set up during your home visit so that parents can interact with the child. So this requires that we understand characteristics of the child and the family, what they like to do together, what they enjoy working on. This dyadic context is only established when the parent and the child have a focus of interaction, an enjoyable interaction. So without this specific environmental arrangement, parents and child might not have a targeted focus, and so the interaction might not be there. The next one is affirming and acknowledge parenting competency. So this provides developmentally supportive interactions that are warmly recognized and expanded upon as are characteristics of child competence. So this allows us to highlight the positive things parents are doing to support their child's development. We all feel better when someone compliments us on something we're doing right. So parents with children with disability oftentimes feel uncertain and question whether or not what they are doing with their child is the right thing to do, especially when their child might not respond directly, might not respond the way that they expect. So when we acknowledge parenting competence, parents will feel more confident and competent and more likely to continue to use the strategies that support their child's development. So for example, when a parent brings over objects that their child likes, simply saying, you know your child really well, that he really likes this item, or you really know what he likes, will make the parent to feel positive regarding the action they have just taken, and then continue to reflect on what are the materials they're going to bring and how they interact with their child. So this is a parent's voice, one of the parents that had said to me that I found really powerful, that this parent felt that the providers would compliment what he does during the session, and it made him feel like he was doing something really well, and it made him really want to continue to do it. The next triadic strategy is on focus attention. And so thinking about aspects of the interaction that are commented upon, expanded, or questioned in order to draw the parent's attention to particular competencies or actions in themselves or the child. So things like, do you see that when you shook that toy, she immediately looked at you and smiled? She knows you are initiating play with her. So saying things like that to highlight to the parent that the child is responding to kind of her way of interacting with the child. The next one is providing developmental information. So providing information about the child's developmental agenda, providing these information verbally, labeling them, interpreting the child's emotional, cognitive, language, and motor abilities within the context of play and interaction. So an example would be, he is really practicing his fine motor skills when he is helping pick up the peas on the floor. So that's an example of highlighting that the child is, working on the fine motor skills, when to the parent it might just seem like, oh, he's just picking up things on the floor. And then the next strategy that I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with is to model some of these strategies. So dyadic interaction roles are momentarily taken on by the interventionist. So when you see that families are not really quite responding and not really taking on the lead and interacting with the child, you could then take over that interaction role and specifically show the family how do you interact with the child, and then turn that role back to the family again, by saying, you try now, or let's see what she will do when you do it. And then the last strategy, which is very, very direct, is to suggest to families what to do. So you as the interventionist provide parents with specific suggestions for something to try with their child. So this allows you as the provider to provide very specific suggestions. For example, to engage the parents with the child, you can say, try handing him the cup and see what he does. or try to look for him at the other end of the tunnel if you look at the picture on the screen. The next slide, I have provided a video to really guide you in reflecting on what are some strategies the early intervention provider had used within this intervention context to facilitate parent-child interaction. And because of time, I'm going to quickly highlight some of the things that I had observed in the video. And the link is accessible to you, and you can go back and watch them, and also, see if you've seen these as well. But some of you might have seen several of these. So this video highlighted the triadic strategies very well. The provider used many triadic strategies to promote parent-child interaction. So, for example, the provider highlighted that even though the child was not putting the blocks right into the container, he is still practicing his grasping skills as he picked up the blocks. So this is the provider's way of, providing developmental information to the family. The provider also commented that the mom really knows the child well and made these fun toys for him to play with. The provider was, highlighting parent competence and acknowledging the parent's effort in creating materials that are enjoyable for the child. Another example was that the provider positioned herself so that she is not the primary interactor with the child in the video. So this is her way of establishing dyadic context. And I think this is really key. Oftentimes when we go into the family's homes, we position the child in front of us, and the parent becomes this third person on the side. But in the video, the provider really highlighted that in order to make sure triadic strategy works and make sure that we are delivering family-centered practice, we need to position the family, the parent, and the child to face one another, because the intervention is around them rather than with the provider. So some rules to guide us as we think about family-centered practice. One, we need to put ourselves in the parent's shoes in order to achieve the right level of support. So thinking about the values, the cultures, what the parents bring to the table, we need to understand these key features in their life that they bring to the table in order for us to provide the right level of support, right level of knowledge for them to continue to interact with the child. We always have to think about the strengths of the dyads and building on these strengths. We need to think about the key outcomes of supporting confidence and competence. We know that in order for the parents to continue to work on the strategies that, that we worked on in the intervention, we have to make sure that they feel confident that these strategies, they can implement these. And so, to the extent we support them within our intervention, and highlighting how they can do this outside of the intervention session is important. We also need to be very careful about modeling and suggesting, because there are such direct strategies that it could come out as very direct to families, maybe not as soft and warm a relationship building approach. So we have to be very cautious in thinking about what families bring to us first, and using language in ways that are not, telling parents to do things directly. And then when we look at the triadic strategies, really thinking about choosing the least directive support, meaning, can you establish the context first and see how the parent interact, meaning, guiding the parents is to focus their attention in the child. So, and then, we wait, we watch, and then we adjust our strategies. The triadic strategies I presented are in really on a least directive to more directive order. And so to the extent that we can use the least directive strategies to achieve the goals of family-centered practice, I think it's going to support that family interaction or parent-child interaction better. Okay, I know I've gone through the last few slides very quickly, and there are two case scenario. So I just want to highlight one scenario, and I'm going to go to case scenario number 2. So this is a scenario that some of you are probably, are nodding your head and saying you've encountered this. So Nellie is at a home visit to provide developmental therapy to Alex, a 2.5-year-old who was recently diagnosed with autism. Alex was very excited to see Nellie at his house and immediately got into Nellie's toy bags to pull out the toys in there. Alex's dad greeted Nellie as she walked into the door and sat back down on the couch to continue to watch his movie. So take about 30 seconds and type a strategy in the chat room of something you might try in this situation.
Okay, we'll give folks a few minutes to kind of think that through, what kind of strategies we use. People are typing. Like Jennifer's talking about encouraging Dad to join and helping Alex pick out the toys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of modeling for the dad. You guys are suggesting strategies within the Triadic strategies to implement. So some of the key things that this provider had used was, having the child go over to the dad and say, here's a toy, let's play together, or asking the provider even asked the dad to find some toys around the house that will support the interaction. So I remember specifically the provider asked the dad, do you have some rice in your house and a Tupperware? Can we put them in there? Let's see what your child would do. And the dad then got off the couch and went in the kitchen and tried to put this toy together. And so when he came over, instead of handing the material to the provider asked the dad to hand the toy over to the child and see what the child will do. And then using that opportunity that he already got off the couch to continue and work on that interaction. Someone has said engaging dad in the conversation about Alex's week and getting the dad to share what are some things that Alex has been doing. I think some of you might be thinking, well, some families already have this expectation that when I come in, they walk away. And it might be really hard to draw them in, because you've been working with them for 6 months and it has been like this for the last 6 months. And I think, taking small steps are very important. So, the next time you go in, asking questions about the child's day. Maybe get the family to sit here for 5 minutes before they go off and do laundry this time. And the next time, trying to provide, kind of tell them to be here a little bit longer or engage them a little bit longer. So those are all different strategies that you can try. Someone has suggested play with Alex close to the dad and encouraging him to show dad the toys. Yeah, that proximity is key, right? If you're working with the child in the kitchen area and the dad is in the living room, moving your interaction with the child to right next to the dad to facilitate that is very important too, and it could be very, very effective. Praise the dad and encourage him to think more ways to play, right? So getting the dad involved, having him do one thing and provide lots of praise, lots of acknowledgement, and highlighting how the child is responding to the dad. It's very important, and you build up that competence the dad has and the confidence, and then he's more likely to then join you more next time you come. Let's see, what are some others? Maria and Mickey, do you guys see any?
I see that Kristen had talked about establishing expectations for this session, explaining wanting to engage the caregiver.
Yeah.
Shelly's talked about having that conversation of creating a starting point of finding out how things have gone. Let's try something new.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at the triadic strategies, and I've seen every one, 5 out of the 6 address. The only one, and I just threw in a question about sharing developmental information, because that was the only one I really didn't see, and maybe I missed it in there. Anyone talking about maybe highlighting to dad, wow, look at what he's doing, look how he's doing X. The next thing we might expect him to do might be Y or whatever, so that dad starts to see, wow, you know, or last time I was here, he was only doing this, and now look.
Right, right. And so in my example of asking the dad to bring in a tub of rice and the child starts playing, I mean, the child is splashing this rice all over the place and, you know, highlighting the motor skills in here. And then we also then support the child in picking up these rice and putting it back in the container, you know, and then through that process, highlighting that this child is working on the fine motor skills. You know, I mean, he's not really grasping with pincer grasp, but he is trying to pick them up, and that's the first step. And then throughout the weeks, as the child continues to develop, then we can continue to highlight the changes we see in the development.
Ginger also says asking dad to turn off the television, which is so much easier said than done. So.
Yeah, and honestly, there are parents sometimes that they would just say, no, I'm not going to, or no, I'm not going to join you, which, you know, it's not uncommon to hear that. And I think, you know, I think my key suggestion will be to not give up, you know, and continue to highlight the powerful impact that the parent can have if the parent is interacting with the child.
There's also talk about having a provider notebook, a therapy notebook that providers write in, but there's also talk about where parents can write in things too that happen in the moment that they can remember to be able to share that.
Yeah, and so Teresa had said that oftentimes families say, oh, I have so much to tell you, but I don't remember. And so providing that notebook for them to write down, or, you know, having, you know, have them text you when it happened. You know, now we are all communicating a lot via text. Parents having them feel like they can text you throughout the day and say, my child is doing this. It's a way of documenting and have a way for getting them engaged as well.
Right, and a couple people suggested, you know, developmental checklists or milestones too, so that it helps parents see changes and know what's coming next. So again, a way a parent can communicate to you, ooh, I noticed this and this, things they might otherwise forget in between times that you visit.
Yeah.
Lots of great ideas in there. So.
Notice too in the chat room that Alyssa has posted a couple of resources that you can, you know, scroll up to and find. We posted a video link, link where you can find a handout on Triadic, a simple 4-page handout or 3-page handout, and also where you can find some of the webinar series. So flip back up if you need to and jot those down. All right, Angel, we'll turn it back to you to just kind of wrap up, I guess.
Yeah, let's see, what do I have? So wrap up. I hope that you've gained some strategies through this session and thinking about what can you do the next time you go into a home visit intervention session. And so, you know, quickly write in the chat room, what is the one thing that you will change or add to your strategy bucket based on this webinar? Just one thing.
We'll give folks a few seconds to kind of come up with one thing that you're going to add or change. All right.
Using family toys. You know, continue to include parents more and thinking about different ways to support families and you know, engage them in your session. Someone has said that, you know, they use focus attention frequently, but didn't know it has a name. Now there's a name for it. Encourage families to take on larger roles using more triadic strategies, using a notebook to help families. So these are all strategies that people are going to be using next time that they go into a family intervention session. Try 1 week with no back. Yeah, so I think, you know, trying to see how you can wean away bringing toy bag. And then, you know, I will say if you only see a child once a week, to try multiple weeks and see how it goes. Use objects already at home. Bring information on working with families and supporting families and interpreters. Great, lots of strategies. Great. Any other final questions that I can address while you type it into the chat room? My contact information is on the screen. Please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk more about any of the things that I shared today or help troubleshoot with specific scenarios that you encounter that's especially challenging.
Okay, and I'm looking at, I don't see any other new questions that have come up, so as we wrap up, I will leave this screen up, so if you want Angel's website, Angel's email address, it's right there. Most of you, just kind of reminder that be on the lookout for that unique email from the EI training program that will have that survey link in there that you will complete so that you can get your certificate of attendance. If you did join as a group, you would have had to have registered individually to get that individual link. So I want to thank Angel for her time. Angel's calling in from Boston, so we appreciate the attention to Illinois and coming back and speaking at your alma mater. And thank you so much. It was great information. Love the information that you all were sharing with each other.
Thank you.
Nikki, you have anything you want to say?
No, I think that's it. As long as they know how to get their certificate, they'll be set. Thank you so much, Angel. This was great. Lots of great discussion to all of our participants in the chat room. So thank you. If you walk away with one or two new ideas, we'll feel like we have served our purpose. And some of it is just reminding us of things we all know. But it's like, oh, yeah, I haven't done that in a while. Or, oh, yeah, I'm going to push myself to try that. So do great things. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us.
All right, thanks again, and at this point in time, our webinar is concluded. Have a great rest of your day.